Welcome to our second video on applying for Parks and Recreation Trust Fund grant. Again, these are your guide to help you prepare your PARTF application. This video covers documentation and information required for all applications. Everything that every applicant must submit. So with the PARTF application and requirement and resources, know that many resources are included in the application document. So if you've downloaded that from the State Parks website, please review that as we go through this all applications video. Again, your recreation resources consultants are available to provide assistance with preparing applications. Please keep in mind that RRS consultants receive many applications every year, and in order to provide a thorough review of your application, we ask that it be turned in for review at least 1 month prior to the grant deadline. This gives you a window of time to also to remedy any issues or provide any other documentation that might be identified in the application package. We want to make sure you don't have any issues and make sure everything is clear. So make sure you contact your regional consultant. They'll be glad to review those, but contact them to set up a time and make sure they have time to review it and get it back to you so you can make those updates. So key resources, look through that section of key resources in the application, and keep in mind several primary things are all planned facilities, anything funded with PARTF, must comply with the Americans with Disability Act accessibility guidelines. That's required by law and for PARTF. Do you have any playgrounds? We strongly suggest that applicants review the Public Playground Safety Handbook published by the Consumer Product Safety Commission. There are links to that on the application as well. And again, you can ask RRS consultants about those resources or additional information. Do you have above ground utilities? Any utility lines that are funded with PARTF must be placed underground, but also keep in mind that if you have an older site you're renovating and you already have some overhead lines, it is an eligible expense to bury those. So that is something to think about as you prepare your application budget. Finally, environmental review. We'll go over that in more detail, but you want to see the resources provided in the application to understand what are potential permit needs and protection of our natural and cultural resources on your site. Again, a lot of links will take you to the review process and contact information. So look through that page in your grant application for requirements and resources to get those hyperlinks. The basic facts and assurances form must be filled out accurately and in its entirety for your application to be considered. An unsigned or undated form will make your application ineligible for consideration for funding. So you want to make sure that it's completed and that it doesn't contain any inaccurate information, because that could reduce your level of competitiveness or limit the amount of funding available to the applicant. So we want to make sure that everything's correct. You need to list the contact person for the grant. So who's the primary person? Sometimes that's the Parks and Recreation Director, for example, but you also have to include the local government manager. Sometimes that's a town administrator, town clerk, or a mayor, for example. The mayor usually goes under chief elected official or the head of the county commission. So make sure you have all those complete. You want to make the correct application type. Is it a land acquisition only project? Is it a development only project, or is it acquisition and development? And remember, donated land does count as land acquisition. You need to document site control, and we'll talk about the attorney certification momentarily, but you want to document that on your basic facts and assurances page, as well as cost rounded up to the nearest dollar. Please keep the project title and description in this section brief. You can see there's not much room to put it there, but you want that brief. You have the justification to give a full description of your project, so keep it brief here. And make sure that this document is signed and dated by the local government's chief elected official. So your description and justification. Note that this, combined with the site plan, are the key documents that the Parks Authority will see as they determine and make decisions on grant selection. The application provides instructions on how to present the information. So please be sure to note the difference between description and justification. Both need to be on that one-page document. The description lists and describes the proposed recreation facilities, the property, and what surrounds the area of the project site. But you want to be concise. The justification is your opportunity. So it's kind of like your megaphone to announce why your project's so significant and needed in your community. So this is how you present it to the Parks Authority, and communicating this need is, if not the most vital component, is the one, if not the most vital component of your application. So you want to make sure that you also, in that justification, explain in a sentence or two why PARTF assistance is needed to complete the project. Sometimes folks are doing really big projects and you think, we're building something for $2 million. Why are we asking for $300,000? So, you need to explain that and why that assistance will enhance your project, and share it with the authority so they know that information. Clearly expressing the positive outcomes of creating new recreation opportunities to the authority is very crucial, especially when you're considering the competitiveness of this program. Every project is a great project, but the authority won't know unless you tell them why. So, this is your chance to tell them why your project should be funded over anybody else's. And quantify the impact. If you can think of, this will serve this number of kids, this demographic level within walking distance, within 10-minute walking distance of this park. Anything that you can use to quantify that information. So, with all the financial resources are scarce, and especially even with the trust fund, the authority is expected to award funding to the projects that are most in need. Also note the formatting requirements for this. It's a one side of a 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper. You need to have a 1-inch left margin on that, and keep the font at 10 point or larger, please. The site plan is that other component that they see. So the Parks Authority sees the one-page justification and the site plan. And this site plan is your visual presentation to communicate the proposed project to the Parks Authority. You want to make sure that it matches up, is what they're reading in the justification. Can they now see that on the site plan? Remember, with both of those, you'll need to provide 20 paper copies in addition to the digital version. This ensures that the authority sees your plan as submitted, your official document. You don't want, State Parks or RRS printing out your one-page site plan. This makes sure that they get it exactly as you've prepared it. Please follow the color coding scheme in the instructions. Park Authority is looking for these colors. Green is what you're asking for park funding for through PARTF. Orange is future development. Black is existing. And then you have easements in yellow. So please follow those instructions in the color coding. If you turn in an application or a site plan that's different color, that can cause confusion as the Park Authority sees that. You weren't following directions. They might not understand what exactly you're trying to fund. So please do that. If you're doing acquisition only, the outline of the park boundary will be in green, but everything that you're proposing to build in the future will need to be on there as a conceptual plan, and that would be in orange. And that's in more detail on the acquisition only video. Greenway or linear park, please look at the example that's provided in the application. That's this lower plan here. You want to make sure that it's very important to illustrate the connectedness, because in this case we have some existing property we're going to put a greenway on, having the opportunity to purchase property to connect those two areas, and we have a pedestrian crossing as it crosses this street. So we know that's a public right-of-way, but you want to make sure the boundary crosses that street so we can see that it's one continuous site. Remember, it's a single site project requirement for PARTF. So you want to make sure that the authority and that we can see when we review it that it is a single site. And in this case, they might have future corridor up here. So that's an orange to show that future potential as well. Project cost, that's a very important element on the funding. We look at that, and elements included in the project costs must be shown on the site plan. So as your RRS consultant reviews your application, if you have them review it before you submit the final version, we usually look at the site plan, the justification, and the cost estimates. And we want to see that all of those match. Do I see what's on the cost estimate is on the site plan and described in your justification? That makes a solid application and very competitive. So you want to look at the project costs, use the template that's included in the application. This is the example. Change your park name and your town and put the date on there that it was prepared. List all elements that you want part of assisted funding. Sometimes communities are building other things that might not be part of they don't want part of funding for. You don't need to include those in the cost estimates, but anything that's included in here, project costs submitted in the application will become the budget as part of the project contract. So if you're awarded, it becomes part of the contract that you must build and complete within 3 years. So keep that in mind, and again, ask your RRS consultants if you have any questions. So a few tips as you prepare your project costs. We want to make sure that you, again, use that template. It's much easier to organize everything and review exactly what you're asking to build. We suggest that you add 25% for a project element to account for inflation. Remember, it could be a full year in preparing your costs before you're awarded a grant. Then you have to bid out the contract. So it could be a year between these cost estimates and when you're actually building it. So you want to add some room in there. Make sure you consider accessibility, the AGDAG guidelines, when you're calculating your construction costs. Document your land acquisition in your project costs. Even if it's being donated to you or sold at a discount, you must include that. And then we'll talk about contingency and planning and incidental costs. So you want to make sure also as you're putting this in, so as an individual item, you have accessible routes. In this case, it's nice to add that this is going to be a paved 6-foot wide path. That gives us information to help as we evaluate your project. Please include units and the cost per unit instead of, some things will be a lump sum, like a playground, or in this case, a ball field. But if you have routes that are $45 per linear foot, that's $18,000 is the total amount you're asking for. Site preparation for 4 acres, the cost per acre, include those. Contingency, as we make sure you include that. It's not required, but it's very nice to have because costs are always going to change by the time you start building it. They cannot exceed 5% of the cost to build or renovate. So this is the cost to build or renovate. It doesn't include anything with planning cost or land purchase, but just this upper section to build or renovate. So that's the 5% of that. Planning and incidental land acquisition costs. So if you hired someone to help prepare your application or who's going to do some construction management, that can be in planning. If you're purchasing land, the cost for an appraisal, any other information such as that can be included. And those are items that can occur prior to the contract period. They're eligible, but only if you include them in your project cost. If you do not include them in this budget, then they will not be eligible for reimbursement. So make sure you include that. Again, planning and incidental land acquisition costs cannot exceed 20% of the cost of the project. So that's this total project cost. So that includes both this cost to build or renovate, plus contingency, any land if you had that, and then planning. And it doesn't have to be 20%, that's just the max. So we want to make sure those numbers are correct before you submit it, or they will be changed. So what are ineligible costs? Sports equipment, tools, maintenance equipment, office equipment, indoor furniture are typically not eligible. So anything like that, typically PARTF is used to purchase land, build or renovate facilities. So think of brick and mortar projects. If you have any funded items, they must be permanently secured, but there are some exceptions to that. So there are some portable items like bleachers. A lot of times you might move those out for a ball game or for a special event. You might move them around your park. Same with picnic tables. Soccer goals are typically portable. However, they must remain at the project site. So they need to be available at that project site. The next item for all applications is the source of matching funds. And this demonstrates the capacity to fund the project. Applicants are not required to provide proof that the town or county will receive funding from all sources listed, but PARTF team uses this information to learn how you might provide a matching share. So in this case, in this example, you'll see that you are allowed to use other state or even federal funds to use as your local match. So in this instance, you have a state grant of $100,000 from Clean Water Management Trust Fund. That can be used as part of your PARTF match. Again, value of donated property. If they get the grant and do that, it's $56,000 in this example. You might have private donations or from a friends group. So these are all things that you can put in from as your funding source match. So keep those in mind. We don't care or mind where you get the match from, but the town or city, the applicant is responsible for doing the project. So that's that important piece. Even if you're funded, you're required to complete the project as described in the contract and based on the budget estimates that you provided within the 3-year period. So this is regardless of the source of the local government's matching funds. So if a private donation falls through, you don't get Clean Water Management Trust Fund grant. In this example, the local government will still be required to make that match and complete everything that's in the grant. So keep that in mind. The next item that we have is a site vicinity map, and here's the sample that's included in the application. Keep it simple, easy to read. You want the recreation consultant, or if a park authority member asks us, how can I go see that park? We give them what's in the application, and we'll help people find it. It's also in the environmental review process. That's why we would like you to include latitude, longitude. That is examined, and it's also used to put it in the database so we can show the geographic locations of all the applications. So make sure that it's large enough to show the street names. You need to keep it on an 8.5 by 11 size, so you might have to zoom in closer, but here's an example from Google Maps or MapQuest where you can get information and even label the highways on there. But include your park name, street address, and the latitude and longitude. So thank you. That concludes video 2, what is required for all applications. And make sure you watch the next videos if you're doing development, acquisition, and then everybody should watch the scoring system and definitions. Thank you.